The waterfall stopped first, then the misting system, then the outdoor kitchen faucets, then the pool filtration went dead. 150 guests at the biggest 4th of July party in Hill Country stood in 94-degree heat, watching every water feature shut off like someone had flipped a switch. Because someone had. Me. From my porch, with one tap on my phone. That water, the water running the waterfall, the misters, the ice maker, the entire party, was my water. Stolen from my grandfather's private well through a line they spliced into without my permission. The HOA president had been throwing luxury parties on stolen water for 3 years, and she'd invited the mayor, the county commissioner, and a news crew to this one. She didn't invite me, though. That was her mistake, because I showed up anyway, with an attorney, a state environmental complaint, and a civil lawsuit. Tell me below, what would you have done? My name is Colton Birch, and I live on 12 acres of Texas Hill Country land, about 40 minutes northwest of Austin. Rolling limestone, live oaks, the kind of quiet that makes you forget the city exists. My grandfather, Wallace Birch, bought this land in 1962 when it was nothing but cedar scrub and rattlesnakes. He built the house himself, cleared the pasture himself, and in 1968, he drilled a well that tapped into the Edwards Aquifer at 320 feet. Clean, cold, mineral-rich water that never quit flowing. That well was his proudest achievement. He used to say, "Water belongs to the land and the people on it." When I was a kid, every neighbor within a mile knew they could fill a jug from Grandpa Wallace's spigot, no questions asked. I grew up helping him maintain the pump, learning about flow rates and pressure systems, while other kids were learning to ride bikes. I went to Texas A&M for civil engineering, spent 15 years designing municipal water infrastructure, then went independent as a water systems consultant. I know water. I know pipes, pressure, flow dynamics, permits, regulations. I know this stuff the way a surgeon knows anatomy. 2 years ago, Grandpa Wallace passed. 89 years old, still sharp as a tack, still walked the property every morning to check the well house. He left me the land, the house, everything. I moved back with my daughter Ellie, who was 14 at the time. We were going to honor what he built, keep the land the way he kept it, maintain the well, live quiet. We buried Ellie's mom 4 years before the move. Cancer, quick and merciless. After that, it was just me and Ellie in a rental in Round Rock, going through the motions, pretending a 2-bedroom apartment could feel like home when the person who made it one was gone. Moving to Grandpa's land was supposed to be a reset, a chance to heal in a place where the air smelled like juniper, and the only noise at night was coyotes and crickets. For the first few months, it worked. Ellie planted a garden where Grandpa used to grow tomatoes. I rebuilt the pump house roof. We ate dinner on the porch every evening and talked about school and water pressure and which birds were nesting in the live oaks. The problem was, the neighborhood around us had changed. When Grandpa first bought in, there were maybe 15 properties out here. Old ranchers, school teachers, folks who liked space. Then about 8 years ago, a developer named Vance Hargrove bought up 60 acres on the east side and started building luxury homes. Big stone front McMansions with 3-car garages and outdoor kitchens. He built 14 of them in 5 years. And with those houses came new residents who thought they'd bought into country elegance, but really just wanted suburbs with more acreage. And with those houses came an HOA, not the kind of HOA that maintains common areas and organizes block parties, the kind that exists to give one person a scepter. Vance's wife was Brenda Hargrove, blonde, heavy-set, always dressed like she was heading to a charity luncheon even when she was just checking the mail. The kind of woman who wore pearls to a neighborhood potluck and corrected people's grammar at board meetings. She got herself elected HOA president 2 years before I moved back, ran unopposed because nobody else wanted the job, which she interpreted as a mandate from God. And she ran that board like a personal fiefdom. Every meeting was Brenda's show. Every rule was Brenda's rule. Every fine, every violation, every passive-aggressive email about trash can placement or mailbox color. All Brenda. The old-timers hated her. But Brenda had the votes, because Vance's buyers were all loyal to the couple who sold them their dream homes. The first time I met Brenda, 3 days after Ellie and I moved in, she came to my door with a welcome basket. Expensive cheese, a bottle of wine I didn't drink, and some sort of scented candle. and a 3-page printed list of HOA guidelines she thought I should review at my earliest convenience. She smiled the whole time, but her eyes were already measuring my property, like an appraiser calculating what she could take. She looked at the well house, a sturdy, cinder-block structure with a corrugated metal roof, and said, "Oh, is that some kind of shed? We have guidelines about outbuildings, you know." I said, "It's a well house. It's been there since 1968. She laughed like I'd told a joke and said, "Well, we'll get you all caught up on the current standards." I thanked her, closed the door, and told Ellie we might have a problem. It started with the water pressure. And if you think a story about water pressure sounds boring, stick with me, because what this pressure drop led to involves forgery, a TCEQ investigation, $340,000 in fines, and one of the most satisfying pool party shutdowns you'll ever hear about. One morning in late April, I turned on the kitchen faucet and the stream came out thin and weak, like the well was coughing instead of flowing. I checked the pump house. Everything looked normal. Motor running, pressure tank cycling, no leaks at the wellhead. But my flow meter told a different story. I was pulling about 60% of my normal volume. Something downstream was siphoning off a significant amount of water. I'm not the kind of man who panics. I'm the kind who grabs a shovel and walks the line. My private water line runs about 900 feet from the well house, under a recorded easement, toward the property boundary before looping back to my house and outbuildings. It's my line, on my easement, documented in county records since 1968. I walked every foot of it that afternoon, checking the ground surface for disturbance. About 600 feet out, near the boundary with the Hargrove subdivision, I found it. Fresh dig marks. Somebody had trenched down to my line, spliced in a T-junction with new PVC fittings, and run a secondary pipe east, directly toward the luxury homes. The soil was soft, the fittings were clean, and the glue joints still smelled like fresh solvent cement. This wasn't old. This was weeks old at most. I crouched there in the dirt, staring at a pipe that had no business existing, and I felt something between rage and disbelief. The smell of fresh PVC cement hung in the air, that sharp chemical bite you recognize if you've ever worked on plumbing. Somebody had physically cut into my private water infrastructure without my knowledge or permission. They'd trenched into my easement, sliced into my grandfather's water line, and rerouted his water to fill a swimming pool for people who wouldn't know a wellhead from a fire hydrant. I didn't touch anything. I took 47 photographs from every angle. I measured the junction dimensions, noted the pipe diameter, and recorded the GPS coordinates. Then I called my buddy Derek Simmons, a licensed plumber and old engineering school friend. Derek drove out the next day, inspected the splice, and confirmed it was recent, professional-grade work done by someone who knew what they were doing. Not a DIY hack job. A hired plumber did this. I emailed Brenda Hargrove that evening. Professional tone, no accusations, just stated the facts. Unauthorized connection found on my private water line, requesting an explanation and immediate removal. Her reply came 3 days later. Not an explanation, not even an acknowledgement. Instead, I got an official HOA violation notice, citing my front yard for unkempt landscaping and visible equipment storage. She was talking about the well house my grandfather built, the one that had been there since Lyndon Johnson was president. I showed Ellie the violation letter at dinner. She read it, set it down, and said, "Dad, isn't the well house older than the HOA?" She was right. 16 years old, and she understood property law better than the HOA president. I tacked the violation notice to the refrigerator as a reminder, not of the insult, of the kind of person I was dealing with. That was the moment I understood what I was dealing with. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a woman who thought she could steal from me and then punish me for noticing. I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board. 12 pages, photographs, measurements, Derek's signed assessment, a copy of my 1968 well permit, and the county easement records showing the water line was mine. I hand-delivered copies to every board member's mailbox on a Tuesday morning. The board meeting was the following Thursday. I sat in a folding chair in Brenda's living room, because of course the meetings were at her house, surrounded by her furniture, her candles that smelled like vanilla and contempt, her framed photos of charity galas where she posed with people who mattered, and presented my evidence to 5 people who wouldn't look me in the eye. Brenda sat at the head of the table with a legal pad and a smile that could curdle milk. When I finished, she thanked me for my concerns and said the board would refer the matter to the appropriate committee for review. There was no committee. There never had been. 2 weeks passed. My complaint vanished into whatever black hole HOA complaints go to when the president controls the filing cabinet. No response, no follow-up, no committee meeting. I even checked the HOA's online portal. My complaint wasn't listed. It was as if it had never existed. I called the HOA's management company, a firm in Austin that probably had no idea what was happening on the ground, and was told my file had been misplaced during a system update. System update, sure. I could practically hear Brenda's manicured fingers shredding my complaint through the phone. So I escalated. I filed a formal complaint with the Burnett County Water Authority, citing unauthorized access to a private water system. Brenda's retaliation was immediate. On a Monday morning, while Ellie was home from school with a cold, a tow truck showed up and hauled my truck off my own driveway. The citation said I was obstructing the designated fire lane, my driveway. The driveway that had been a driveway since 1962. Ellie watched through the window, scared and confused, as strangers took her dad's truck. Then came the whisper campaign. I started hearing from neighbors that Brenda was telling people I was unstable, that I was hoarding water resources and threatening the community's water supply. She flipped the entire narrative. In her version, I was the villain, a selfish man trying to keep water from his neighbors. The irony was thick enough to choke on, but some people believed it because Brenda said it with a smile and a casserole. I got my truck back 2 days later after threatening the towing company with a wrongful seizure claim. Cost me $340 in fees that I would eventually add to the lawsuit. The smell of diesel from the tow truck lingered on my driveway for a week. Here's something most people don't know about Texas water law. If you have a well drilled before an HOA was formed, that well is grandfathered. The HOA cannot annex it, regulate it, or claim shared rights to it. Your well, your water, your line. Period. That's not an opinion. That's Texas Water Code. You can look it up yourself. And the moment someone taps into your private water system without authorization, it's not a neighborhood dispute. It's theft of a utility resource. And in Texas, that carries civil and potentially criminal liability. The county finally sent an inspector, a guy named Dale Murchison, mid-50s, khaki pants, clipboard, seemed competent enough. Had a firm handshake and made good eye contact. I thought, okay, this guy's the real deal. He came out, looked at the splice, took some notes, and told me he'd have a report within 2 weeks. I felt cautiously optimistic. An independent third party was going to confirm what I already knew. What I didn't know was that Vance Hargrove had already gotten to Dale. I found out later, much later, that Vance hosted a barbecue the weekend after the inspection. Casual, friendly, just some brisket and cold beer on a Saturday afternoon. Dale Murchison happened to be there. So did 3 county employees from the planning department. Vance was a developer who'd been greasing local wheels for a decade. He knew exactly how to make a problem go away without ever saying the words out loud. A handshake here, a round of golf there, maybe a mention of some land that might be available for a good price. And suddenly, everyone understood that the Hargrove properties weren't to be scrutinized too closely. That's how things work sometimes in small counties. Not through envelopes of cash, through relationships and favors, and the understanding that some people are too connected to bother. 2 weeks later, I got the inspection report. No actionable violation found. 4 words that told me everything I needed to know about how deep the rot went. The report didn't address the splice. It didn't mention the pressure drop. It was written in the kind of deliberately vague language that bureaucrats use when they've been told to look the other way. I read it 3 times, sitting at my kitchen table, listening to the well pump cycle in the background. Grandpa's well, pushing water through Grandpa's line, and someone was stealing it while the county shrugged. I remember the exact moment I read that report. There was a mockingbird singing outside the kitchen window, and the afternoon light was hitting the floor in that golden way it does in late spring in the hill country. Everything looked peaceful, but the paper in my hands felt like a door slamming shut. That night, after Ellie went to bed, I sat on the porch with a glass of water from my own well and made a decision. I was done playing by their rules. I was done filing complaints with people who threw them away. I was done trusting a system that had been bought and paid for by brisket and handshakes. If the local channels were compromised, I was going to build a case so complete, so devastating, and so public that no backyard barbecue in the world could make it disappear. I pulled out a notebook and started writing. Not a complaint this time, a plan. Every line item was a step. Every step had a deadline. Every deadline pointed toward one date on the calendar that Brenda didn't know was coming for her. I stopped talking to Brenda. I stopped filing with the HOA. I stopped expecting the county to help, and I started building. The deeper I dug, the bigger the hole got. And I don't mean my trench near the property line. I mean the pit of fraud, negligence, and corruption that Brenda and Vance Hargrove had been covering with landscaping and cocktail parties for the better part of a decade. I drove to the county clerk's office in Burnet and started pulling records, original well permits, property surveys, water connection permits for every home in the Hargrove subdivision. I'm a civil engineer. I know what proper infrastructure paperwork looks like. And what I found was a disaster. What I found made my blood run cold. Vance Hargrove's development company had never obtained proper water connection permits for any of the 14 luxury homes he built. Not a single one. The municipal water connections were done through shortcuts, informal agreements, and what appeared to be permits that were applied for but never actually approved. Some of the connections ran through easements that belonged to other properties, including mine. This wasn't just a stolen pool line. This was systematic infrastructure fraud across an entire subdivision. But that wasn't the worst of it. While pulling HOA records, I found a document I'd never seen before. It was titled Shared Water Resource Agreement, and it claimed that the HOA had legal rights to access and distribute water from all private wells within the community boundary. My grandfather's name was referenced as a consenting property owner. There was a signature line for him, but the signature wasn't there. Instead, the document was signed by someone named Gerald Fitch, HOA president, with a date from 2019, 5 years after my grandfather had stopped attending any HOA functions, and 3 years before he died. I called my grandfather's old attorney. He confirmed that no such agreement had ever been executed. Wallace Birch never signed anything giving the HOA water rights. The document was a forgery. Brenda Hargrove had fabricated a legal document to justify stealing my water. My hands were shaking when I held that document, not from fear, from fury. This woman had put my grandfather's name on a lie. She had used the memory of a man who gave water away freely to justify stealing it. If there was ever a line she shouldn't have crossed, it was forging a dead man's consent. I sat in my truck in the county parking lot for 20 minutes, just processing what I'd found. A red-tailed hawk circled over the courthouse, riding the thermals, patient and unhurried. I watched it for a while. Then I started the engine. This wasn't a neighborhood squabble anymore. This was criminal fraud on top of systematic code violations, and I had every single piece of paper to prove it. I spent the next 6 weeks in full operational mode. First, the legal team. I hired Meredith Calloway, a water rights attorney out of Austin who specialized in private well disputes and TCEQ enforcement actions. She reviewed my evidence and said 3 words that made me feel like the ground had shifted. This is airtight. Second, the state complaint. Meredith helped me file a formal complaint with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, TCEQ. That's the state-level authority that handles water system violations, and they don't play golf with local developers. The complaint documented the unauthorized water connections, the forged shared rights agreement, and the systematic permit violations across all 14 Hargrove homes. TCEQ confirmed they would launch a formal investigation. Here's something worth knowing. In Texas, TCEQ has the authority to issue administrative orders, levy fines up to $25,000 per day per violation, and refer cases for criminal prosecution. You can file a complaint online or by mail, and once TCEQ opens an investigation, local connections don't matter anymore. It's a state-level agency with state-level teeth. When TCEQ opens a file on you, it's not a suggestion, it's a reckoning. And you can Google the entire complaint process right now if you want to. It's public information. Third, the infrastructure. And this is where being an actual water systems engineer turned into the ultimate advantage. I installed industrial-grade electromagnetic flow meters on every branch of my water system, the kind that log data with timestamps accurate to the second. I upgraded my remote shutoff valves, systems I'd already installed because I'm an engineer, and that's how I think. I tested the mobile app control from my phone. One tap and every valve in my system would close simultaneously. The water would stop flowing to any unauthorized connection instantly. Fourth, the cameras. I installed weatherproof security cameras along my waterline easement and near the T-junction, with night vision and cloud-based recording. Everything time-stamped, everything backed up. Fifth, the community. I started talking quietly to the old-timers, the original homeowners from before Vance turned the east side into McMansion Row. Turns out, I wasn't the only one Brenda had bullied. Margaret Peel had been fined $1,200 for her garden fence being 4 inches too tall. Bo Henderson got cited for parking his work trailer on his own land. Hank Weaver received a $600 fine for leaving Christmas lights up until January 8th. Every single one of these people had a story about Brenda treating the HOA like a weapon and the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. They were all tired and angry, and when I explained what I'd found, the stolen water, the forged documents, the rigged inspection, they were all willing to stand together. Margaret said, "Just tell us when and where." Bo said something less polite that I won't repeat here, but his meaning was clear. Sixth, and this was the timing that mattered most, I knew about Brenda's annual 4th of July pool party. She threw it every year like it was the Met Gala of Burnett County. 200 invitations, catered food, live music. The mayor came. The county commissioner came, local press came, and this year, she'd just finished installing a 25,000-gallon luxury swimming pool with a cascading waterfall, a misting system, an outdoor bar with running water, and a restaurant-grade outdoor kitchen, all of it fed by one source, my stolen water line. Another thing worth knowing. Remote shutoff valves for private water systems are commercially available products. You can buy motorized ball valves with Wi-Fi controllers for a few $100s and install them yourself. They connect to your phone through an app, and you can open or close any valve from anywhere with cell service. For someone like me, it was basic engineering. For Brenda, it was going to be the worst surprise of her life. Sixth, the allies nobody saw. Meredith had discreetly contacted the assignment editor at the local news affiliate, not to plant a story, just to let them know that if they were covering Brenda's party on July 4th, they might want to stick around a little longer than planned. The editor was curious. Meredith said, "Just keep the cameras rolling." I looked at the calendar. July 4th was 5 weeks out. I marked it in red and wrote one word next to it. Done. Brenda smelled something. She couldn't see my case, but she could feel the ground shifting. 3 weeks before the party, she sent me a registered letter on HOA letterhead, declaring my well a potential safety hazard to community health, and threatening to petition the county for condemnation proceedings. It was legal nonsense. A maintained, permitted, grandfathered private well can't be condemned by an HOA. But it was designed to scare me. It didn't. The letter smelled like expensive perfume, which somehow made it worse. Vance showed up at my property the next day with a man in a blue suit who introduced himself as their attorney. He spoke in that particular tone lawyers use when they want to sound reasonable while making threats. Something about property boundary disputes and potential liens and the cost of prolonged litigation. I stood on my porch, hands in my pockets, and let him finish. Then I said, "You should talk to my attorney," and gave him Meredith's card. He looked at the card, then he looked at the card again. Then he looked at Vance. Something in his expression shifted, the kind of shift that happens when a lawyer realizes his client hasn't told him the whole story. They left without another word. The crunch of their shoes on my gravel driveway was the most satisfying sound I'd heard in weeks. The worst part came through Ellie. She came home from school one afternoon, dropped her backpack by the door, and sat at the kitchen table without saying a word. When I asked what happened, she told me that Brenda's kids had been telling everyone at school that we were going to lose our house, that I was a water thief, that I was crazy and dangerous. My 16-year-old daughter, sitting at the table where my grandfather used to drink his morning coffee, asking me with tears in her eyes if we could please just let them have the water so everything could go back to normal. I knelt down, took her hands, and told her something my grandfather told me once. Ellie, when someone steals from you and then tells you you're the problem, that's not a reason to give in. That's a reason to stand up. We're going to be fine. I promise. That night, after she went to sleep, I sat on the porch and stared at the stars over the hill country. The Milky Way was out, that thick band of light. You can only see this clearly when you're far enough from the city. Grandpa used to call it God's waterline. I sat there and felt something cold and clear settle into my chest. Not anger, not sadness. Resolve. The kind that doesn't shout, the kind that builds quietly in a man until it becomes load-bearing. They had messed with my property. They had corrupted the system. They had forged my grandfather's name. And now they had come after my daughter. There was no version of this where I walked away. 3 days before the 4th of July, I watched from my porch as a parade of contractors descended on the Hargrove property. Landscapers installing decorative stone around the pool, electricians wiring string lights across the patio, a catering company setting up a tent that could seat 60, and the plumber, the same plumber, I later confirmed, running final connections from the water line to the new waterfall feature, the misting poles, the outdoor bar taps, and the commercial ice maker. Every single new feature required water, gallons and gallons and gallons of it, flowing constantly, 24 hours a day in the lead-up to the event. My flow meters showed a 40% increase in diversion volume during those 3 days alone. Brenda's party prep was literally draining my well faster than it could recover. Every drop was coming through my stolen line, and she had no idea that every drop was also being logged, time-stamped, and added to the evidence file sitting on Meredith Calloway's desk. Brenda sent out 200 invitations on cream-colored cardstock with gold lettering. The guest list included the mayor of Granite Shoals, the Burnett County commissioner, a state representative's aide, and a crew from the local news affiliate who'd been promised an exclusive look at the most beautiful backyard in hill country. She did not invite me, naturally. I found out because Margaret Peel showed me the invitation she'd received. Cream cardstock, gold lettering, a watercolor illustration of the pool. It read, "Join us for a star-spangled celebration of community." I almost laughed. Community, built on stolen water from a dead man's well. What Brenda didn't know, as she taste-tested canapes and argued with florists about centerpiece heights and obsessed over whether the pool lights should be blue or teal, was that Meredith Calloway had a cease and desist letter sitting in her briefcase, that the civil lawsuit was filed and ready to serve, that the TCEQ investigation was confirmed to launch the week after July 4th, that my remote shutoff system had been tested 14 times and worked perfectly every single time, that I had 3 years of flow data, 47 photographs, a forged document, and a hydraulic analysis prepared by a licensed engineer proving exactly how much water had been diverted and when. All she knew was that her party was going to be fabulous. All I knew was that her party was going to be the last one she ever threw. The night of July 3rd, I couldn't sleep. Not from nerves, from anticipation. I walked out to the well house around midnight, the way Grandpa used to do. The pump hummed its steady rhythm. The pressure gauge read normal. 320 feet below my boots, the aquifer was doing what it had been doing since before any of us were born. Holding water, sharing it with whoever had the sense to ask the earth respectfully. Grandpa understood that. Brenda never did. I checked the weather forecast. Clear skies, 94 degrees. Perfect pool party weather. I checked my phone app. The shutoff valve showed green. Ready. I picked up the framed photograph of my grandfather from the porch table. He was standing next to the well house, grinning, holding a wrench. I set it back down, looked toward the Hargrove property, and said quietly, "Almost there, Grandpa." July 4th. The most beautiful day Burnett County had seen all summer. Blue sky stretched from horizon to horizon without a single cloud. 94 degrees by noon, with a light breeze that carried the smell of barbecue smoke and fresh-cut grass across the hill country. I could smell the brisket smoke from my porch, that rich, mesquite-heavy scent that normally would have made my stomach growl. Today it smelled like arrogance. By 1 o'clock, the Hargrove property was transformed. The pool glowed turquoise in the sunlight. The waterfall cascaded down a 12-foot stone facade, filling the air with that gentle, rushing sound that makes everything feel expensive. The misting system sent cool fog drifting across the patio, where guests stood in linen shirts and sundresses, holding drinks from the outdoor bar. The ice maker hummed. The outdoor kitchen ran full capacity. Dual sinks, a prep station with running water, a commercial dishwasher spraying endlessly. Kids splashed in the shallow end. Adults lounged on floating chairs. A DJ played classic rock from speakers mounted on the pergola. The mayor arrived at 1:15, the county commissioner at 1:30. The news crew set up at 2, filming the waterfall, the crowd, Brenda greeting guests like she was hosting the governor's ball. She wore a white sundress and gold jewelry and moved through that party like she owned the sun. Vance worked the grill, shaking hands, slapping backs, telling the commissioner about his plans for Phase 2 development. 153 guests at peak count. I know because the news footage showed the crowd clearly. I sat on my porch with Ellie. She'd asked if she could watch, and I said yes, she deserved to see this. We drank lemonade and listened to the music drifting over from the party that was running on her great-grandfather's stolen water. Ellie sat in the chair next to me, reading a book, glancing up every few minutes at the party. She'd grown up a lot in the past few months. She understood what was about to happen, and she understood why. She'd stopped asking me to give in. Instead, that morning, she'd said, "Grandpa would want you to do this." I told her he would, because he would have. At 2:30, I opened the flow meter app on my phone. The diversion line was pulling 19 gallons per minute, peak usage. The waterfall, the misting system, the kitchen, the pool filtration, all running at maximum capacity. Brenda had never been more dependent on my water than she was at that exact moment. At 2:45, I looked at Ellie. She looked back at me. I picked up the photo of Grandpa Wallace and set it facing the Hargrove property. At 2:47, I opened the shutoff app. The valve icon glowed green. I pressed it once, and the water died. It didn't trickle. It didn't fade gradually. It didn't sputter out over minutes. It stopped, dead. The remote valve closed in under 2 seconds, a quarter-turn motorized ball valve doing exactly what it was designed to do, and every drop feeding the Hargrove property vanished like someone had pulled the plug on the entire afternoon. 2 seconds. That's all it took to end 3 years of theft. The waterfall's cascade sputtered once, twice, then went silent. 12 feet of stone facade suddenly dry, water trails glistening in the sun like tear tracks. The misting system coughed. A few weak sprays hissed out, then nothing. Guests standing under the mist poles looked up, confused, reaching for cool air that wasn't coming anymore. The outdoor bar faucet stopped mid-pour. A bartender turned the handle back and forth, getting nothing but air. The ice maker ground to a halt with a mechanical groan. The pool filtration pump seized. The gentle circulation current in the pool disappeared. The surface went still and flat. For about 10 seconds, nobody understood what had happened. Then the murmuring started. Is the water out? Did something break? The waterfall stopped. A woman near the misting poles fanned herself in the sudden heat. A kid in the pool asked why the jet stopped. The DJ kept playing, but the mood had cracked. Brenda's face went from confusion to panic in about 4 seconds. She was mid-conversation with the mayor's wife when she heard the waterfall stop, and her head snapped around so fast her gold necklace swung. "Vance? Vance! The water is off!" "What happened to the water?" Her voice carried across the entire patio, cutting through the music. Vance jogged to the pool equipment shed, checked the pump, checked the connections, opened every valve he could find. He came back looking pale and sweating, and not just from the heat. Nothing was broken, nothing was clogged. The water was simply gone, like it had never been his to begin with, which of course, it hadn't. The news camera operator, to her eternal credit, swung around and started recording the chaos. I stood up from my porch chair. I straightened my shirt. I picked up a leather folder from the table. Meredith Calloway was already walking up my driveway in a gray suit, briefcase in hand, exactly on schedule. We'd rehearsed the timing the day before. We walked together across the property line toward the Hargrove estate. Calm, measured, not rushing, every step deliberate. The crowd parted slightly as we approached. Some people recognized me as the neighbor. Some looked at Meredith's suit and knew this wasn't a social call. Brenda saw me from across the patio, and for one brief moment, the blood drained from her face. She knew. Somewhere deep in her gut, she knew exactly what was happening. She tried to recover. She put on that smile, the one she used at board meetings when she was about to deny someone's appeal. But it flickered, like a light bulb about to die. "Colton! Oh, thank God. We have some kind of water emergency. Can you—" Meredith stepped forward. "Ms. Hargrove, I'm Meredith Calloway, attorney for Mr. Colton Birch. You and Mr. Vance Hargrove are being formally served with a cease and desist order and civil lawsuit for unauthorized water diversion, property damage, forgery, and fraud." She handed Brenda the papers. Brenda took them reflexively, like someone catching a ball thrown at their chest. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. Meredith turned to the county commissioner, who was standing 6 feet away holding a plate of brisket. She handed him a thick manila envelope. "Commissioner, this is a formal complaint packet filed with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, documenting systematic water permit violations across the Hargrove development. 14 properties, no proper permits. TCEQ has confirmed an investigation." The commissioner slowly set down his plate. The brisket suddenly didn't seem as interesting as it had 30 seconds ago. I spoke for the first time. Not loud, not angry, just clear enough that the people nearest us could hear, and the news camera's microphone could pick up every word. "I shut off the water because it's my water. It comes from a well my grandfather drilled in 1968 on my property, through my private water line, on my recorded easement. It has been diverted to this property without my knowledge or consent for approximately 3 years. These are the permits." I held up the folder. "These are the flow records. These are the photographs of the unauthorized splice. And this," I held up a single sheet of paper, "is a forged document filed by the HOA, claiming shared water rights to my well. My grandfather never signed it. It's fraud." A woman in the crowd said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "They stole his water?" Brenda found her voice. "This is ridiculous. This is a community resource. You can't just—" "It's a private well on private property, with a private easement recorded since 1968, Meredith said. "There is no community resource. There never was. The document claiming otherwise is forged." Vance pushed through the crowd. "Now hold on, we can talk about this. This is just a misunderstanding." "Mr. Hargrove," Meredith said with the calm of a woman who had spent 2 months building a file that could sink a development company. 14 homes in your development have no proper water connection permits. You'll be hearing from TCEQ directly. My client has no further comments." The commissioner was reading the complaint packet, flipping pages, and his face was getting darker with every page. The mayor leaned over his shoulder, read something, and took a step back. I looked at Brenda. She was standing in her white sundress, holding lawsuit papers in one hand and a glass of champagne in the other, surrounded by 150 guests who were rapidly figuring out that the most beautiful backyard in hill country was built on stolen water. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. 150 people standing in 94-degree heat on a patio where the misting system was dead and the waterfall was dry and the pool was going stagnant, staring at a woman in a white sundress who was holding proof that she'd built her paradise on someone else's stolen property. I said one line, the only line that mattered. "You've been throwing parties on stolen water for 3 years, Brenda. This one's the last." The news camera caught Brenda's face at the exact moment those words landed. I've seen the footage since. It's the face of someone who just realized that every shortcut, every lie, every forged document, and every bullied neighbor had finally come due, all at once, in front of everyone. I turned around and walked back to my property. Meredith walked beside me. Behind us, the party collapsed. Guests left in waves. The news crew kept filming. Brenda screamed something I didn't bother to hear. Ellie was standing on the porch when I got back. She didn't say anything. She just hugged me. She smelled like sunscreen and lemonade. And over her shoulder, I could see the Hargrove waterfall, dry, silent, and done. In the distance, car engines started, doors slammed, and the sound of a party dying carried across the hill country air like something finally being set right. From somewhere inside the Hargrove house, I could hear Brenda screaming. Not at anyone in particular, just screaming. The sound of a woman who had just watched 3 years of stolen power evaporate in 90 seconds. I closed the porch door and poured Ellie another glass of lemonade. The local news ran the story that evening at 6 and 10. By morning, it was statewide. The TCEQ investigation moved fast. Within 3 weeks, inspectors confirmed every violation I'd documented. 14 homes with improper water connections, multiple unauthorized taps, An estimated 2 million gallons of water illegally diverted over 3 years. Vance Hargrove's development company was fined $340,000. 6 homes were ordered to undergo mandatory water system reconstruction at the developer's expense. The forged Shared Water Resource Agreement was referred to the Burnett County District Attorney. Brenda Hargrove became a person of interest in a criminal fraud investigation. Last I heard, her attorney was negotiating. My civil lawsuit settled in September. Vance's attorneys tried to fight it at first, but once TCEQ's findings went public, their leverage evaporated like water on hot limestone. The final number? $185,000 for stolen water, property damage, legal fees, and what Meredith diplomatically called emotional distress. Brenda and Vance signed a permanent cease and desist, barring them from ever accessing my water system in any form. Every unauthorized connection was removed. My easement was restored. My well was mine again. Brenda tried one last move. She sent a mass email to the neighborhood calling me a disgruntled property owner with a personal vendetta, and claiming the water dispute was a misunderstanding being exploited by outside attorneys. Nobody responded. Not one person. The silence must have been deafening. The HOA held an emergency election in August. Brenda was removed as president by a vote of 41-3. The 3 were her sister-in-law and 2 of Vance's business partners. The old-timers took over. Margaret Peel became the new president. First order of business, abolishing every petty fine Brenda had issued in the past 4 years. Second order, rewriting the bylaws to protect property rights and prevent any single member from weaponizing the board. Third order, installing a proper community bulletin board so no complaint would ever be lost again. Bo Henderson volunteered to build it. He used cedar from his own property and bolted it to the wall outside the community center. It's still there. The county inspector, Dale Murchison, was quietly reassigned after the TCEQ findings contradicted his original report. I heard he took early retirement. I didn't feel sorry for him. When you look the other way for a brisket dinner, you lose the right to complain about the consequences. The news story ran on 3 local affiliates and got picked up by 2 statewide outlets. The headline that stuck was, "Hill Country HOA President Caught Stealing Neighbor's Well Water for Pool Party." It got 400,000 views online in the first week. Brenda deleted her social media. Vance quietly listed their house for sale. Brenda and Vance listed their house for $1.2 million. Last I checked, it had been on the market for 5 months with no offers. Turns out nobody wants to buy the most famous stolen water house in Hill Country. The real estate listing doesn't mention the pool. Funny how that works. But here's the part that matters most to me. I took a portion of the settlement money and built something on the southeast corner of my property, right near the road where anyone could access it. A small stone pavilion with a stainless steel spigot connected to my well's filtration system. Clean, cold, tested water, available to any neighbor who needs it. No charge, no sign-up sheet, no HOA approval required. We built it over a weekend. Derek helped with the plumbing. Margaret brought sandwiches. Bo Henderson poured the concrete pad. Ellie painted the sign herself, in blue and white letters. Birch Family Water Station. In memory of Wallace Birch. Free water for all neighbors. The first person to use it was an elderly woman from the old section named Dorothy, who'd been hauling jugs from town because her municipal connection had been unreliable for years, thanks to Vance's shoddy infrastructure work. She filled 2 gallons, looked at the sign and said, "Your grandpa would be proud." I had to turn away for a second because something got in my eye. Definitely dust. Hill Country is dusty. The water station gets used almost every day now. Runners stop by on their morning route. Kids on bikes fill up bottles in the summer. One of the families from the new section, a young couple with a baby who had nothing to do with Brenda's mess, brings a jug every Sunday. They always wave. I always wave back. That's what a neighborhood is supposed to look like. 6 months later, I stand by that station sometimes in the evening, watching the sun go down over the 12 acres my grandfather loved. The well still runs, the land is still ours, and the water flows free, the way it always should have. Grandpa Wallace taught me that some things aren't for sale. Not the water, not the land, not your integrity. Brenda Hargrove taught me that too, just not the way she intended. If you've ever dealt with an HOA that went too far, a neighbor who thought the rules didn't apply to them, or someone who tried to take what was yours and call it community, I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to know they're not alone. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Because next week, I've got a story about a man who discovered his HOA was secretly renting out his backyard easement to a cell tower company. You don't want to miss it.
So here's what I take away from Constance's story, and I hope you do too. Brenda Halfgrow didn't lose because she stoned water. She lost because she confused authority with ownership. She sat in that HOA chair long enough that she started to believe the chair made her untouchable. She thought filing a false document was just paperwork that no one would ever check. She thought bullying a quiet man and his daughter would make them disappear. And she thought throwing a party in front of the mayor would somehow protect her from the truth. It didn't. What beat Brenda wasn't anger. It wasn't luck. It was preparation. Costin documented everything. He hired the right attorney. He filed with the right agency. He didn't shout, he built. And when the moment came, he didn't just shut off the water. He shut down the line. The part that stayed with me, though, is the water station. That's who Costin really is. Not a man who wanted revenge. A man who wanted to honor his grandfather and protect his neighbors. If you ever deal with someone who abused a little power to make your life miserable, tell me in the comments. I read everyone. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, and stick around for next week. I've got a story about a man who found out his HOA was secretly renting his backyard easement to a cell tower company. It's the wild one. I'll see you there.